I used to believe that love, when it arrived in my life, would feel like freedom, something warm, something that made my chest feel lighter instead of heavier. But I was raised in a home where love was not something you chose. It was something chosen for you. My parents always believed they knew better than I did. What I should study, what I should wear, who I should talk to, and eventually who I should marry. By the time I turned 26, I had stopped arguing. It wasn't that I agreed with them. It was just that arguing felt like trying to stop a river with my hands. So when they told me they had found the perfect match, I didn't say no. His name was Adrian, at least that's what I will call him here. He came into my life like a carefully written answer to a question I never got to ask. Polite smile, steady voice, respectful tone. He spoke about family values, stability, and commitment like he had been trained to say exactly what my parents wanted to hear. And they loved him instantly. My mother said he was a blessing. My father said he was a responsible man who understands discipline. I remember those words strangely now. Discipline. At the time, I thought they meant responsibility, structure, maturity. I didn't think they meant control. The engagement happened fast. Too fast, if I'm honest, but in our house, speed was always mistaken for certainty. The sooner something was decided, the less room there was for doubt, and doubt, in my family, was treated like rebellion. Adrian visited often after that. At first, everything felt normal. He brought flowers sometimes. He remembered small details I mentioned. He laughed softly at my awkward jokes. When my parents were around, he was everything they wanted him to be: respectful, attentive, almost perfect. But I started noticing something strange when they weren't around. The warmth in his voice would fade. His eyes would become more analytical, like he was studying me instead of loving me. And there were moments, small, easy to ignore moments, when he would say things that didn't feel like his own thoughts. "You should listen to your parents more," he said once casually while we were alone in the living room. Another time, when I disagreed with something trivial, he smiled and said, "You'll understand after marriage. Structure matters." It didn't feel like advice. It felt rehearsed. Still, I told myself I was overthinking. Everyone gets nervous before marriage. Everyone adjusts. That's what I kept hearing from my relatives, from neighbors, from even my closest cousin who whispered, "You're lucky. He's stable. Don't ruin it with doubts." So I buried the discomfort. What I didn't notice at first was how often my parents and Adrian began talking privately, long conversations behind closed doors, conversations that would stop the moment I entered the room. My mother would smile too quickly. My father would clear his throat and change the subject. Once I walked past my father's study and heard Adrian's voice through the slightly open door. "She needs more guidance," he was saying calmly. "She's emotional. That can be corrected with consistency." My steps froze, corrected. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the wall, waiting for laughter, waiting for someone to say it was a joke. But there was no laughter, only agreement. My father's voice followed after a pause. "She has always been a bit stubborn," he said. "We trust you'll handle it well. Handle it well." Something inside me shifted that day, though I didn't fully understand it yet. I walked back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at nothing. My heart wasn't racing. It was worse than that. It was quiet, like it was listening. I told myself I had misunderstood. I had to have misunderstood, because the alternative meant something I wasn't ready to accept. Over the next weeks, Adrian became more familiar with my family than I was. He knew their routines, their preferences, even their moods. He would arrive at our house and immediately fall into step with them, like he had always belonged there. My mother started praising him in ways that felt almost rehearsed. "He understands how to maintain order," she said once, while I stood nearby pretending not to hear. Order, that word again. And slowly, I began to feel like I was the only thing in the house that didn't belong to that order. Still, I wore the engagement ring. Still, I smiled in photos. Still, I nodded when people congratulated me. Because in my world, saying no wasn't just disagreement. It was disruption. And disruption came with consequences I had learned to fear since childhood. But deep down, something inside me was no longer fully quiet. It was watching, waiting, and beginning, very slowly, to remember every detail I had been told to ignore. At first, I thought marriage was just beginning to shape Adrian differently. People often change when commitment becomes real, I told myself. They start thinking more seriously, speaking more carefully, adjusting their expectations. That was what everyone around me kept repeating, but what I was witnessing wasn't growth, it was conditioning. The shift in Adrian didn't happen all at once. It came in layers small, almost invisible at first, like water slowly rising in a room until you realize too late that you're no longer standing on dry ground. He started using words that didn't belong to him. You should be more obedient to your elders, he said one evening while we sat in the garden. His tone was casual, almost conversational, like he was discussing weather. I blinked, obedient. He smiled slightly. Not in a bad way, just disciplined. It makes life easier. That word again, discipline. It followed me everywhere now. Around the same time, my parents began treating Adrian less like a guest and more like an ally. They would exchange long looks when I entered a room, as if I was interrupting something important. Conversations would pause mid-sentence. My mother would quickly change her tone from serious to sweet, like a mask snapping into place. And Adrian, he noticed everything. He adapted to them perfectly, too perfectly. One night, I overheard laughter from the kitchen. My parents and Adrian were inside, but I had gone there to get water. I stopped just outside the doorway when I heard my mother's voice. She can be emotional, she said lightly. You'll need patience with her. Adrian chuckled softly. I understand. Some people need structure more than comfort. Structure more than comfort. I froze. That wasn't love. It wasn't even concern. It sounded like instruction. I stepped back before they could notice me, my hand trembling slightly around the glass I was holding. I went to my room and sat on the floor instead of the bed, like my legs couldn't carry me anymore. I started noticing patterns after that. Whenever I disagreed with something, Adrian didn't argue anymore. He didn't raise his voice. He simply repeated phrases. Calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. You'll learn after marriage. Your perspective is still developing. This is how a stable relationship works. And each time he said it, my parents would later echo similar sentiments in private. It felt like I was living inside a script I had never been allowed to read. One afternoon, I came home earlier than expected. The house was unusually quiet, except for voices coming from my father's study. I wasn't trying to listen. I was just walking past, but then I heard Adrian clearly. She needs to understand boundaries, he said. A pause, then my father replied, she always struggled with that. That's why we chose you carefully. My steps stopped completely. There was another voice then, my mother's. We just want her to be manageable, she said softly. She's a good girl, but she needs direction. Manageable. The word hit me harder than anything else. I stood there, unable to breathe properly, watching the door as if it had suddenly become something dangerous. My mind tried to reject what I was hearing. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they were talking about something else. But deep down I knew. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was design. I walked away silently, my heartbeat loud in my ears. That night I didn't sleep. I kept replaying every conversation, every smile, every carefully chosen word. Adrian wasn't just becoming different, he was being taught, and my parents weren't observers, they were instructors. Days later, I tried to confront Adrian gently. I asked him why he kept using certain phrases, why he sounded so different lately. He didn't even hesitate. "I'm just preparing for marriage life," he said calmly. "Your parents and I agree on how things should be handled. Your parents and I." Not just him, not just them, a shared understanding, a shared plan. Something inside me tightened. That night, I sat alone in my room long after everyone had gone to sleep. The engagement ring felt heavier than before, like it was no longer just jewelry, but a symbol of something I hadn't agreed to. I thought about love, and then I thought about control disguised as love. For the first time, I didn't feel confused anymore. I felt awake, and that awareness didn't bring peace. It brought something sharper. Something that would not let me forget what I had heard behind closed doors. By the time the wedding preparations began, the house no longer felt like a place I lived in. It felt like a stage being arranged around me, piece by piece, where every smile had a purpose and every conversation had an audience. My parents called it blessings in motion. Neighbors called it a perfect match. Relatives called it lucky timing. But I had started noticing something different. Everything felt too coordinated, too rehearsed. Adrian was no longer just my fiancé. He was now treated like an essential part of my parents' decisions. He attended discussions about the wedding schedule, guest list, even my dress selection. At first, I thought it was just enthusiasm. Then I realized he wasn't participating, he was approving. One evening, I walked past the hallway and heard voices coming from my parents' room. The door was slightly open. I didn't intend to stop, but my name caught me mid-step. She reacts emotionally. My mother was saying softly, "You need to stay firm after marriage." A pause, then Adrian's voice calm and steady. "I understand. Consistency is important." Consistency. My father added, "We've already explained her patterns. She just needs structure. Don't let her question things too much." My chest tightened. Patterns, they were talking about me like I was a problem to be managed, not a person to be understood. I stepped closer before I even realized I was moving, and then I heard it, the sentence that changed everything. "She just needs to be handled properly." My mother said, "Handled." A long silence followed, and then Adrian spoke again. Quieter this time, almost respectful. "I've taken notes," he said. "I know how to deal with her behavior after marriage." My stomach dropped. Deal with her behavior. Something cold spread through my body, not panic exactly, but recognition. Like pieces of a puzzle I had refused to assemble were suddenly locking into place. I walked away slowly, carefully, making sure my footsteps didn't echo too loudly. When I reached my room, I closed the door and leaned against it for a long time. My mind kept replaying the words, taken notes, deal with her behavior, handled properly. It wasn't just influence anymore. It was planning. The next days passed in a blur of wedding discussions, fabric selections, guest lists, and forced smiles. But now I saw everything differently. Every time Adrian spoke to me, I noticed subtle control disguised as advice. "You shouldn't wear that style," he said once gently. "It might give the wrong impression. You should let your mother decide more things. She understands tradition better. After marriage, we'll set a routine. It will help you adjust." Adjust, that word became unbearable. One afternoon, I accidentally found something that confirmed what I had been trying not to believe. I had gone to the living room looking for my phone charger when I saw Adrian's phone left on the table. It lit up with a notification. I didn't mean to look, but the screen was facing upward. A message preview was visible. From my father, remember what we discussed. Firmness is important. She responds better when she feels controlled. My hands went cold. Another message followed almost immediately from my mother. Don't let her emotional reactions disturb the plan. Stay consistent. We trust you. Trust you. Plan? My vision blurred slightly as I stepped back from the table. It wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It wasn't even manipulation in isolation. It was coordination, a system. A plan built around me without me. That night, I couldn't sit still. I kept walking around my room, replaying every interaction, every conversation, every carefully placed word. Adrian wasn't just being influenced. He had been trained, and I had been the subject of that training. The realization didn't make me cry. It made me still, strangely still, because somewhere between disbelief and acceptance, something else had started forming inside me. Clarity. Over the next few days, I began observing everything with a different mindset. I paid attention to conversations more carefully. I noticed how often my parents and Adrian exchanged glances when I spoke, how often they redirected conversations away from my opinions, and I started recording things quietly, not loudly, not dramatically, just small pieces, a sentence here, a conversation fragment there, a pattern of behavior I could no longer ignore. One evening, I sat alone and listened to a voice recording I had secretly saved by accident earlier. Adrian speaking with my parents in another room. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. She needs structure immediately after marriage. He said, if she resists, firmness will correct it. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just agreement. My parents responded without pause. Exactly. That single word echoed in my mind longer than anything else. Exactly. I put the phone down slowly, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was inside a wedding anymore. I felt like I was inside a trap that had been decorated beautifully, so I wouldn't recognize it. And the worst part wasn't the betrayal I had discovered. It was the realization that they had all agreed I would never notice it. The morning of the wedding arrived like a dream that didn't belong to me. White flowers lined the entrance of the house. Guests filled every corner with soft laughter and congratulatory voices. Music floated through the air like nothing in the world had ever gone wrong here. Everyone smiled as if happiness was something carefully arranged in advance, like decorations or lighting. But I didn't feel any of it. I felt still, not nervous, not emotional, just aware. Every step I took that morning felt like I was walking through a script I had already read in silence. My dress was heavy, but not as heavy as the truth I carried inside me. My parents kept adjusting my veil, my jewelry, my posture. Small corrections disguised as care. You look perfect, my mother said softly, eyes shining. Perfect, that word again. Adrian stood waiting at the altar when I arrived. He looked calm, composed, exactly as everyone expected him to look. A man ready to protect, lead, and guide. But now I knew what those words meant in their language. Control. I met his eyes briefly. For a fraction of a second, something flickered there, confidence mixed with expectation. Like he already knew how the rest of my life was supposed to unfold. My parents sat in the front row, proud and satisfied. They weren't watching a wedding. They were watching completion. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke. The guests leaned in. Cameras lifted. Everything moved exactly as planned, and then came the moment. Do you take this woman? I heard the words, but they didn't land the way they were supposed to. They floated past me like echoes in a hollow room. My fingers slowly tightened around something hidden inside my hand. A small remote. No one noticed it. No one expected it, because in their version of this story, I was not supposed to have control over anything. The officiant turned toward me. "Do you?" I didn't answer, not immediately. Instead, I looked at the guests, at the smiles, at the decorations, at the people who believed they were witnessing love. Then I looked at my parents, and finally at Adrian. He smiled slightly as if encouraging me. It was time. I pressed the button. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the speakers crackled. A screen behind the altar flickered to life. Confusion rippled through the crowd, and then his voice, Adrian's voice, calm, clear, undeniable. She responds better when she feels controlled. A pause. My mother's voice followed. Don't let her emotional reactions disturb the plan. My father's voice after that. She just needs structure. Firmness is important. The room changed instantly. Whispers turned into confusion. Confusion turned into shock. Shock turned into silence, so deep it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. The video continued, more conversations, more instructions, more carefully spoken plans about me, about how I should be handled, corrected, managed after marriage like a project that required discipline instead of love. Adrian's face changed first, the calm cracked, then my mother stood up. "What is this?" she whispered sharply. My father's hand tightened on the chair. "No, this is not." But the voices kept playing. Every word I had collected, every recording I had saved, every truth I had been forced to carry alone. Now it belonged to everyone. Guests began standing, murmurs grew louder, someone dropped a glass, someone else stepped back in disbelief. The illusion was breaking in real time. Adrian turned toward me quickly. "This is misunderstanding," he said, but his voice was no longer steady. Misunderstanding, that word used so often to silence me now sounded powerless. I looked at him calmly. "You rehearsed my life," I said quietly. He froze. My mother tried to step forward. "This is private family matter," but someone in the crowd interrupted. "Private," a voice said. "This is abuse." That word landed heavier than anything else. Abuse. The room shifted completely after that. People weren't watching a wedding anymore. They were watching exposure. Adrian tried to speak again, but no one was listening now. My father looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as a daughter, but as something they had failed to control. And maybe that was true. I slowly stepped away from the altar. No shouting, no tears, no collapse, just movement. My veil slipped slightly as I turned, but I didn't fix it. For the first time, I didn't need to look perfect. Behind me, chaos unfolded, voices rising, questions multiplying, truth spreading faster than control ever could. But I didn't stay to watch all of it, because this wasn't about revenge that needed noise. It was about truth that no longer needed permission. I walked down the aisle I was never meant to question, and as I reached the exit, I heard the last thing I needed to hear, silence replacing celebration. For them, everything had fallen apart. For me, something had finally begun.